Northern British Columbia, Canada. Endless forests, volcanic rock formations, and hundreds of miles of empty highway where getting a cell signal is a matter of luck. July 15th, 2019, 6:20 a.m. A truck driver is making his usual run along Highway 97, a stretch locals often call the Alaska Highway. Through the morning haze, something unusual catches his eye on the shoulder of the road. He eases off the gas. Parked on the gravel is a blue 1986 Chevrolet minivan. Both passenger side doors are standing wide open, and one of the windows has been completely shattered. But what makes the driver slam on the brakes isn't the vehicle. It's what's lying in the ditch. Face down on the ground are two people, a young man and a young woman. They're about 10 feet from the van and nearly 16 feet apart from each other. The truck driver jumps out of his cab and rushes over, hoping to provide first aid. But it's already far too late. Their bodies are cold to the touch. It's immediately obvious they've been there for hours. Panicked, the trucker begins waving his arms, trying to slow the few passing vehicles and redirect traffic so their tires won't destroy any evidence scattered across the pavement. The first calls to emergency services begin coming in. At exactly 7:20 a.m., officers with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrive on the scene. They find the truck driver in severe shock, while a mystery is unfolding on the highway that, over the coming weeks, will capture the attention of the entire country. The examination begins. The medical examiner quickly confirms both victims have entrance and exit gunshot wounds. They both died from gunfire. Officers carefully search the ground around the minivan and recover 5 spent shell casings. Lying beside the young woman's body is her cell phone. But the young man's phone is nowhere to be found. It's simply gone. And this is where I'd like to pause for just a moment. When I went through the investigative files for this case, one thing stood out more than anything else: the location. This was a complete dead zone. No surveillance cameras. No gas stations for hundreds of miles. No witnesses anywhere within earshot of the gunfire. Before we start putting this complicated puzzle together and find out exactly who was lying on that roadside, I'd really appreciate your support. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and drop any comment below. I spend a lot of time digging through verified case files and documented evidence so I can bring you factual stories without tabloid speculation. And your support is what makes these deep dives possible. Now let's get back to the investigation. At this point, investigators have 2 unidentified victims, 5 shell casings, and a damaged minivan. Police are only beginning to document the scene when the timeline suddenly takes an unexpected turn. Just 4 days later, July 19th, we move roughly 300 miles from the first crime scene to the area near Dease Lake. It's nearly an 8-hour drive away. Local emergency crews respond to reports of a vehicle on fire along the roadside. When they arrive, they find a camper fully engulfed in flames. The vehicle is almost completely destroyed, leaving behind little more than its metal frame. But investigators get a lucky break. The rear license plate survives just well enough for officers to run it through the police database. While the system searches for the registered owner, first responders begin combing the nearby tree line surrounding the burned-out vehicle. It doesn't take long before they make another discovery. About 1 mile from the burned camper, they come across a third victim. It's a man. He appears to be between 50 and 60 years old, with a thick gray beard. He, too, died from gunfire. There are no identification documents, no wallet, and no keys on him. There's no way to identify him at the scene, so investigators quickly prepare a composite sketch based on his appearance and distribute it to news outlets across the country. As detectives begin connecting the dots, they realize something deeply concerning. The distances between the crime scenes are enormous, but the time frame is incredibly short. During the first press briefings, law enforcement officials admit they still don't know whether these people were specifically targeted or simply happened to cross paths with whoever was responsible. 3 people had been shot within just a few days on isolated highways in northern British Columbia. A double crime scene along Highway 97, a burned camper near Dease Lake, and a third victim found nearby. One conclusion becomes impossible to ignore. Someone armed is moving freely across the highways of British Columbia. But to understand whose faces would soon appear on every major news broadcast in Canada, and who every police agency in the country would soon be searching for, we need to step back in time. Let's return to July 15th, when investigators were still collecting the very first pieces of evidence around that damaged blue minivan. While forensic specialists are sealing shell casings into evidence bags, international databases begin producing the first matches. The identities of the 2 victims found along the roadside are confirmed, and suddenly this case grows far beyond the borders of a single province. The victims are identified as 24-year-old Chinna Dees from North Carolina and 23-year-old Australian traveler Lucas Fowler. The situation becomes even more serious when investigators learn that Lucas's father is a serving senior police inspector with the New South Wales Police Force in Australia. Australian authorities immediately become involved, sending investigators to Canada to assist and monitor the case on the ground. One detail really stood out to me while going through the investigative records. Lucas and Chinna weren't inexperienced tourists taking their first trip into the wilderness. By that point, they had already traveled independently through 13 countries, from Central America to Japan. They had worked on farms overseas, camped in remote wilderness, and built years of real-world outdoor experience. So it's only natural to ask, how could a couple with that level of experience end up completely vulnerable on an empty highway? They knew exactly how to deal with strangers. At the same time, the composite sketch of the third victim, released to the media, begins generating leads. A woman contacts the police tip line after recognizing the man with the gray beard as her husband. Investigators identify him as 64-year-old Leonard Dyke. He was a faculty instructor in botany at the University of British Columbia. His students described him as a quiet, highly attentive professional with a deep love for nature. A few days before his body was discovered, on July 16th, Leonard loaded a camping stove into his Toyota RAV4 and set off alone on a wilderness expedition to study the region's natural environment. Investigators now know the identities of all 3 victims. What they still don't have is a motive. Different ages, different countries, different reasons for traveling. Attention quickly shifts to one crucial piece of evidence: the camper that had burned down to little more than a metal frame, found not far from Leonard's body. Investigators run the surviving rear license plate through the vehicle registry. The camper belongs to 2 teenagers from Vancouver Island, 19-year-old Cam McLeod and 18-year-old Briar Schmigelski. The 2 had been close friends since childhood. They worked together stocking shelves at a local grocery store, and not long before these events, they both quit their jobs at almost the exact same time. On July 12th, they packed up their belongings and headed north, telling people they were looking for work. As detectives dig into the backgrounds of the camper's owners, they begin finding some unusual details. They learn that Briar's life changed dramatically after his parents went through a difficult divorce. He gradually withdrew from almost everyone around him and became increasingly isolated, spending most of his time online. His interests centered on violent shooter video games, Nazi ideology, and firearms. At first glance, it might seem like the profile of a likely suspect. But at this point in the investigation, police are looking at the evidence very differently. 3 people have been found dead along remote highways. The teenager's camper has been burned to the ground. and Calm and Briar are nowhere to be found. Across Canada, most people believe one theory. An armed offender had targeted the traveling couple and the university instructor, and then had likely done the same to the two missing teenagers. The public is demanding that police find the mysterious gunman. As July moves into its final weeks, forensic ballistics experts finally complete their detailed analysis of the evidence. The results completely overturn the original theory. The shell casings carefully collected beside the blue Chevrolet, along with the unfired ammunition recovered from the burned camper, are a perfect match. The caliber, the unique markings left on the metal, everything is identical. The firearm used in the shooting of Lucas and Chinna had originally been inside the missing teenager's camper. Investigators immediately pull firearm licensing records and uncover another disturbing piece of the puzzle. Just days before leaving on their trip north, one of the teenagers had legally purchased an SKS semi-automatic rifle along with a box of ammunition. He held a valid firearms license, and the purchase had been completed through a licensed gun store in full compliance with Canadian law. At that point, the pieces of the puzzle begin falling into place at an alarming pace. Then, on July 21st, the investigation reaches a major breakthrough. Police obtain surveillance footage from the town of Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. Let's take a second to appreciate just how far these two had traveled. This is an enormous distance from where the victims were found. The fugitives had driven hundreds of miles east, confidently crossing provincial borders. Then investigators spot something familiar on the surveillance footage: a gray Toyota RAV4. The very same SUV Leonard had driven when he left to study bears and the surrounding wilderness. The surveillance footage is clear enough to show exactly what's happening inside the vehicle. Cam is behind the wheel. Briar is in the passenger seat. They're alive, unharmed, and clearly haven't been abducted. The cameras capture them pulling into the parking lot of a local hardware store. They walk inside without drawing any attention and purchase a roll of wide black electrical tape. A few minutes later, they're back at the SUV. One strip at a time, they begin covering the chrome trim and other reflective parts of the vehicle, trying to change the appearance of the stolen SUV just enough to avoid being recognized. Police immediately call an emergency press conference. This time, there are no routine updates. The tone has completely changed. Standing at the podium, an officer makes a statement that leaves the public stunned. The two young men from Vancouver Island are no longer considered missing persons. Effective immediately, they are the primary suspects in the 3 fatal shootings. Authorities issue a direct warning to everyone watching. If you see them, do not approach. Do not try to speak with them. Call emergency services immediately. Investigators believe the 2 suspects are armed and extremely dangerous. But on the very same day that announcement is made, police uncover a detail that's almost impossible to believe. It turns out Calm and Briar had been stopped only a short time earlier. The encounter happened in the small community of Split Lake. A local community safety patrol had pulled over the gray SUV during a routine impaired driving checkpoint. The officers carefully looked inside the vehicle. The 2 young men remained calm, polite, and showed no signs of alcohol impairment. Because of communication limitations in these remote regions, updated bulletins identifying them as suspects had not yet reached local dispatchers. The officers had no idea who they were talking to. They wished the pair a safe trip and sent them on their way, just moments before the nationwide manhunt fully closed in. Then, on July 23rd, the search leads investigators to the tiny community of Gillam in northern Manitoba. A local resident named Billy Bird discovers a vehicle still smoldering in the woods. It's the same gray SUV the fugitives had tried to disguise with black electrical tape outside the hardware store. The vehicle had been abandoned and set on fire deep in the forest, not far from the Fox Lake Cree Nation. Forensic investigators secure the area around the burned vehicle and begin processing the scene. Scattered across the ground, they find an unusual collection of items: the ignition keys, several automotive tools. Everything suggests the suspects stopped there for a while. They may have tried to repair the vehicle or possibly hide evidence. But at some point, they left in a hurry and disappeared into the wilderness on foot. All you have to do is open a map to understand just how extraordinary the scale of this case had become. From the site where Lucas and Chinna were found, along Highway 97, to this burned SUV, the suspects had traveled nearly 2,000 miles. They had crossed 3 massive Canadian provinces from west to east, somehow managing to stay one step ahead of law enforcement the entire way. Gillam itself is essentially a geographic dead end. Fewer than 1,500 people live there. There's only one road in and one road out. Beyond that, it's nothing but endless wilderness. The moment investigators confirm the location of the burned SUV, the quiet town transforms into the center of one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history. Hundreds of officers are rushed to the area. Police tactical teams arrive. K-9 units with specially trained dogs join the search. The Canadian military is officially brought in to assist. Drones and helicopters, equipped with thermal imaging cameras, begin flying continuous search missions overhead. Residents receive strict instructions. Keep your doors locked. Don't leave your homes during the day or at night unless it's absolutely necessary. Police go door to door, checking more than 500 homes, inspecting every basement and every shed. The active search area expands to nearly 4,000 square miles. So why does an operation involving that many people and that many resources suddenly begin to stall? The answer lies in the landscape itself. I spent quite a bit of time reading search and rescue reports from this region. And trust me, this isn't the kind of forest where someone can simply hide behind a few bushes. It's an unforgiving wilderness. Dense vegetation quickly gives way to deep muskeg and swamps, where a person can become trapped within seconds. Then add the exhausting summer heat, relentless clouds of biting insects, and brown bears roaming the area. One experienced tracker warns investigators that this land doesn't forgive overconfidence. Anyone who doesn't understand how to survive here can disappear without a trace. Commanders soon realize that even their most advanced technology is practically blind in terrain like this. They urgently need someone who truly knows the land. That's when they bring in Billy Bird, the same local resident who found the burned SUV. He knows every bend in the waterways and every hidden trail through the wilderness. Together with Billy, search teams load into motorboats and begin working their way downstream along the powerful Nelson River. At last, it's the shoreline that begins giving investigators their first real clues. Officers traveling by boat notice several items scattered in the mud. The first thing they recover is a backpack. Inside is a heavy box of ammunition. Farther downstream, they find a sleeping bag. Then they recover a wallet and personal hygiene items that belonged to Leonard. Billy points out something detectives immediately recognize as important. The current in this section of the Nelson River is incredibly strong. These belongings couldn't have simply drifted ashore. Someone deliberately left them on land. By now, the fugitives appear to be running out of strength. They're abandoning anything that slows them down as they push deeper into the dangerous wilderness. August 7th. The search across the remote wilderness of Manitoba has now been underway for nearly 3 weeks. Resources are stretched thin. That day, Billy Bird is once again patrolling the Nelson River in a motorboat. Suddenly, He notices a single raven circling persistently over a deep ravine near the riverbank. Billy knows this landscape better than almost anyone, and he knows exactly what a scavenger bird like that can mean in a place this remote. Without hesitation, he radios police and gives them the coordinates of the difficult-to-reach location. The search team struggles through thick brush until they reach a small, hidden creek. A short distance from the water, they find two bodies. They are 19-year-old Com McLeod and 18-year-old Briar Schmigelski. The massive manhunt that had gripped all of Canada is officially over. At the scene, forensic investigators reconstruct the fugitive's final moments. Lying beside Com are two rifles. One of them is still in his hand. Based on the physical evidence, investigators determine the sequence of events. Com first shot Briar. He then turned the firearm on himself. Investigators conclude the two had made a mutual pact after realizing they had no realistic way to escape. But the most important piece of evidence is waiting nearby in the mud, just a few feet from the abandoned firearms. It's the digital camera that belonged to Leonard. When forensic specialists examine the memory card, they recover 3 photographs and 6 short video recordings. In the photos, Briar poses with the SKS semi-automatic rifle, while Com takes a selfie with the dense forest behind him. The videos turn out to be a final recorded journal. In the first recording, the two calmly accept responsibility for all 3 fatal shootings. What they never explain is why. In the second video, they seriously describe what they believed would be their next move. They planned to steal a boat, travel downriver to the ocean, somehow cross it, reach Europe or Africa, and continue carrying out more shootings there. By the third recording, their attitude has changed. Briar says with obvious frustration that the river's current is far too powerful. Getting a boat is impossible, and they have decided to end their own lives. And this is where I have a question for you. How did 2 young men who had spent their lives working at a grocery store believe they could cross the Atlantic Ocean in a random riverboat? That isn't real-world thinking. It sounds like the logic of a video game, a complete disconnect from reality. At some point, they seemed to believe they were living by the rules of a first-person shooter instead of the real world. Then the Nelson River confronted them with reality, forcing them to realize there was no way out. The recordings leave investigators stunned. Canadian authorities make a firm decision. The videos will never be released to the public. Behavioral analysts strongly advise against publishing any of the footage. They conclude that the emotionless, matter-of-fact way the suspects speak could inspire copycats or turn them into symbols within extremist online communities. The digital recordings are sealed away as evidence indefinitely. Now let's go back to the night when all of this began. With the ballistic evidence, surveillance footage, and witness statements now in hand, investigators are finally able to reconstruct what happened on that lonely stretch of highway without speculation or missing pieces. On July 14th, Lucas and Chinna's blue Chevrolet breaks down on an isolated highway. A passing traveler stops and offers to help. The couple politely declines, confident they can repair the vehicle themselves before morning. Around 11:30 that night, a highway maintenance worker drives past the stranded couple. She notices another vehicle parked beside the minivan and a bearded man standing nearby. The conversation on the shoulder of the highway appears tense. And this is where I need to make an important clarification to avoid any confusion. The witness did not see Leonard, the gray-bearded professor. He was nowhere near that location that night. What she actually saw was a younger man with a thick, unshaven beard, either Com or Briar. A short time later, another passing driver catches a brief glimpse of someone stepping out of a vehicle with a rifle, holding it in a distinctive hunting stance. Investigators believe it was during that window of time that the fatal shots were fired. A few days later, the fugitive's path crosses with Leonard. They shoot him, set their camper on fire to destroy evidence, and take his Japanese-built Toyota SUV, which they use in a desperate attempt to escape across eastern Canada. There is never a trial. The criminal case is officially closed following the deaths of the two primary suspects, but one person does receive the recognition he deserves. Billy Bird, the local tracker whose knowledge of the wilderness proved critical to the search, is honored by his community. He is presented with a traditional star blanket and an eagle feather in recognition of his role in bringing the investigation to an end. As I go through cases like this, I keep coming back to the same thought. The feeling of safety can disappear far more quickly than any of us would like to believe. In this investigation, detectives recovered shell casings, reconstructed the suspects' movements, uncovered their final video recordings, and pieced together a clear timeline of what happened. Today, we know how those events unfolded on that lonely stretch of highway. But one question still has no logical answer. Why? No explanation. Just a senseless act of aggression in the middle of the Canadian wilderness.